Hello, I'm Ben and you're watching A PhD Parent. So in the current video, I'll provide an overview of the research evidence that addresses 3 toilet training related questions. Number 1, when should you start toilet training? Number 2, is there any way to know when a kid is ready to start toilet training? And 3, when do kids tend to learn toileting skills? So in another video, I discussed toilet training techniques and obstacles, and if you want to check out that video, the link is down below. So without further ado, when should I start toilet training my kid? Rather than recommending a specific age at which toilet training should begin, researchers instead provide an age range, recommending that for typically developing children, toilet training should begin when the child is 18 to 30 months old. Now, this recommendation has its roots in the 1960s following the introduction of child-oriented approaches for toilet training. In the years prior, it was recommended that toilet training begin much earlier. For example, in the 1932 edition of Infant Care, it was suggested that toilet training can begin when a child is 4 weeks old and should always begin by the time a child is 12 weeks old. And rather than being child-oriented, toilet training practices were coercive and rigid. Apparently, as part of toilet training, some experts recommended the use of a soap stick rectal conditioner. No idea what that is, reluctant to Google it, and I assume it's not pleasant. So these days, parents in Western cultures generally follow the 18 to 30 months old recommendation, with parents typically beginning toilet training when kids are 18 to 36 months old. And soap sticks are no longer part of the toilet training process. So how can I know when my kid is ready to start toilet training? So when your child is in the 18 to 30 months age bracket, as a parent, you still have to make a judgment about when your child is ready to begin toilet training. So how can you know when to start? Researchers suggest that parents should wait for signs of toilet readiness. In a review of the literature, Coyotes found that 21 signs of toilet readiness have been proposed. These signs include things such as the kid being able to exert voluntary control over bowel and bladder movements, asking for the potty, and not going overnight. Now, the reason I won't bother listing all 21 signs is that if you're like me, you'll be asking, are some signs more important than others? Or how many signs does my kid need to be showing before toilet training starts? And I reckon those are good questions. Now, to cut a long story short, researchers and experts do not agree on which or how many signs should be present before toilet training should begin, which is not all that helpful. Presumably, this lack of consensus partly reflects the absence of research in the area. As far as I know, only one study by Windale has tried to determine which readiness signs are the best indicators of when to start toilet training. Good study to do, but I think it has a few problems. The biggest problem is that it suffers from statistical shortcomings. Without going into the details, or for any stats people out there, the researchers didn't correct for multiple comparisons despite carrying out over 65 analyses. The important thing to know is that their statistical approach used significantly increases the chances of concluding that a particular readiness sign or signs is important when in fact it's not. So with this in mind, the study involved recruiting 270 kids between the ages of 15 to 35 months who were attending daycare. The kids were separated into 3 groups. Not yet started toilet training, and successfully completed toilet training. The signs of toilet readiness the kids showed had been prospectively assessed. The results suggested that expressing the need to poo, showing an interest in toilet training, wanting to be clean and being distressed by wet or soiled diapers, and being able to pull their clothes up and down were the readiness signs most evident in kids who had successfully completed toilet training. Thus, the researchers argued that these could be considered useful signs to look out for. However, for the reason described, I wouldn't put too much weight in these findings. So here are 4 things I took away from reading the research on signs of toilet readiness. First of all, recommendations about which readiness signs to look out for are currently based upon clinical experience rather than solid research evidence. Second, in typically developing children, all but one readiness sign will have begun to develop by the time the child is 21 months old. So potentially holding off until then, rather than starting at 18 months, may reduce the chances of starting too early and toilet training being unproductive. Third, however, no harms resulting from early training have been identified in typically developing children. So if you start before your child is ready, there's no basis for concern. And finally, in typically developing children, all but 6 readiness signs are fully developed by the time the kid is 30 months old. So you could be reasonably confident that a kid would be ready to start toilet training around then. So now on to when do kids pick up toileting skills. So the following study is included for anyone wanting to have an idea of when different toileting skills are acquired. So Shung recruited about 270 kids who were 15 to 42 months old and living in the Milwaukee area from 1995 to 1997. Parents provided weekly surveys of their kids' toileting skills for a period of 12 to 16 months. Now, before getting to the results, one thing to mention is that you shouldn't get too caught up in the numbers. It's best to treat the findings as ballpark figures for when a skill might be acquired. And there are at least 3 reasons for this. First, to make things easier, I collapsed across the data for boys and girls. In general, girls tended to acquire skills a little earlier than boys. Second, the data was collected over 25 years ago. There's no evidence that parents have been commencing toilet training earlier across the past few decades, and so if anything, kids these days may tend to acquire these skills a little bit later. And third, the data is mostly from white kids in Milwaukee, so it'd be sensible not to make any sweeping generalizations. At any rate, here are the findings. Remember, these data should be treated as ballpark figures only. Kids vary in terms of when they acquire these skills, in part as a function of their gender, but also when they start toilet training, the intensity of toilet training they undergo, and other factors. So for the moment, that's it for when to start toilet training. If there's anything I've gotten wrong, any important research I've overlooked, or if you have any questions, then feel free to get in touch. Otherwise, happy parenting.